Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone around the world who is joining us today, and welcome to the launch event of the IIASA Flagship Report, System Analysis for Sustainable Wellbeing. My name is Barbara Kreisler, and I'm the Head of Communication and External Relations at IIASA, the International Institute for Applied System Analysis, and I will be your moderator for today. We have gathered here today an extraordinary group of highly distinguished speakers who will discuss their vision about the post-2030 global development agenda. And while the midterm review of the Sustainable Development Goals is currently underway, this is indeed a very opportune time to speak about the future and the future about the development agenda, and how science-based global system analysis, which IIASA has been leading for more than half a century, can determine possible priorities for our common future. Before we get started, let me just briefly outline the structure of the next hour. We will kick off with 4 introductory statements, followed by the presentation of the IIASA Flagship Report, and thereafter we will hear 2 feedback statements. You will have the opportunity to put your questions into the question box. So I do encourage you to use that, and we hope to get to as many of those at the end of our session. Now, let me turn to our first speaker, and it is my distinct honor to welcome the Deputy Permanent Representative of Austria to the United Nations, Mr. Stefan Bretterhofer. Thank you so much, Deputy Permanent Representative, for being with us today. And also thank you so much for the Austrian Permanent Mission to co-sponsor this event. We really appreciate your support. We look forward to your opening remarks. So without further ado, Mr. Bretterhofer, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Moderator, and good morning from New York. Warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Permanent Mission of Austria to the United Nations. Mr. President, Mr. Director General, distinguished panelists, and dear guests, it's a great pleasure for my mission to support this key event, which highlights the significance of the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, its scientific network around the globe, as well as the wealth of publications the Institute produces, all far beyond scientific circles. As we will hear in greater detail from distinguished panelists and speakers, the flagship report that will be launched and introduced today reflects half a century of highest quality scientific achievements of this important institution. It is therefore no surprise that the Austrian Federal President, Alexander van der Bellen, a long-term academic and professor himself, has contributed to this report with a foreword. He reminds us of the pioneering role of your institute in science diplomacy, as well as in early groundbreaking research on the global changes we face today, including climate change and sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, the fact that today's event takes place at the margins and in the context of the current 78th session of the UN General Assembly and the SDG Summit illustrates the tremendous importance and recognition of science as a foundation and part of intergovernmental decision-making process in the United Nations. And we therefore are extremely pleased that His Excellency Ambassador Csaba Köröcsi, the President of the 77th session of the UN General Assembly, a science champion and one of the chief science diplomats, if I may say so, is joining us at today's event. Köszönöm szépen, tisztelt elnök úr. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by thanking the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis once again, the sponsors and partners, contributors and speakers for making this online presentation and launch of the report possible. I wish all of us an inspiring and interesting session, and I wish the Institute all the best for the next 50 years, which will be, without any doubt, no less challenging than the previous 5 decades. I thank you very much and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bretterhofer, for these framing remarks. This is a wonderful way to kick off this event. Very much appreciated. Let me now turn to our next speaker and join me in welcoming His Excellency Mr. Csaba Körösi, President of the 77th UN General Assembly. Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for taking the time to be with us today. As we have just heard, you have concluded your term as President of the 77th General Assembly, and we therefore very much look forward to your reflections on the current status of the SDGs and your vision for the future global development framework. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chrysler. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. As we heard from the previous speaker, 50 years ago, it was a groundbreaking idea to create a scientific institution across the political trenches and to focus on system challenges across disciplines, fields of research. At this time around, the challenges are even more complex than 50 years ago. We are crossing tipping points of the planetary boundaries. Almost a third of UN membership are in danger zone in terms of soaring debts, close to fiscal collapse. Altogether, mutually reinforcing factors are indicating a looming perfect storm. Halfway through the implementation period of the Agenda 2030, the SDGs, as it was just mentioned, we are way off track and time is running out. To make a leapfrog, what we really need, to make a leapfrog, we need more than acceleration. We need changing gears, changing direction, and changing the game. This is our only chance. Some of the game changers are the science-based decision-making, the application of systemic approach, and rapid increase of the resilience. The knowledge by IIASA is needed more than any time before, because we are closer to we are closer than any time in the last 70 years to a cascading crisis. So my congratulations to IIASA for the accomplished work of the last half a century. On behalf of all member states of the UN, I'm expressing the hope that we can count on your support to the sustainability transformation to shape the difficult but necessary decisions in each and every country, and to advise on the most burning issues and in a language that speaks to all decision makers. So thank you once again. Congratulations to the flagship report, and we are very much counting.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for these insightful remarks and the much needed call for action. We will now swiftly move on to our next speaker, and I'm very pleased to introduce Seppo Hashigonta, who is Director of Strategic Partnerships at the National Research Foundation of South Africa. Seppo, it's wonderful to have you with us, and thank you also very much for agreeing to co-sponsor this event and for your continued strong support to IIASA, serving currently as a IIASA Council member. Seppo, thanks so much. Please go ahead with your remarks.
Thanks a lot, Program Director, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone participating. Thanks as well to the Director for IIASA, Albert van Nierseveld, for this opportunity. Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Excellency, President, 77th Presidents of the UN, we acknowledge your presence. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'd also like to acknowledge distinguished guests of IIASA expertise and the community of IIASA for the excellent work that they are doing, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And as per the other speakers that I've just mentioned, I think the core message that is coming out here is we need action. We need to produce knowledge, we need to produce skills, we need to produce innovations that are much more focused, dedicated, and that contribute to actioning the SDGs. And as we heard, the time for actioning the SDGs is coming to very close end at the moment. On behalf of the Department of Science and Innovation and the National Research Foundation of South Africa, would like as well to take this opportunity to congratulate the team who worked on the report. Very well done for the publication, and we are very much confident that as per IIASA's excellent works in the past, this report will further add value to the many issues that the world with. And as we heard earlier on, over the last 50 years, IIASA has played and continues to play a very critical role in developing cutting-edge innovation, cutting-edge knowledge, and the skills development that the IIASA is producing. And we hope and trust that that will continue going in the future. Within Sub-Saharan Africa, we are the first regional member of IIASA, and we are looking forward to growing that cohort of programs, skills development programs, research programs in the continent as we address all these many challenges that we have in the world. Thanks a lot, and congratulations once again to IIASA. Looking forward to further engaging in this platform and going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seppo, for these kind words. Much appreciated. We are now concluding the first group of introductory speakers with the Director General of IIASA, Albert van Jaarsveld. Albert, IIASA is active in so many different fields pertinent to the SDGs, so we very much look forward to your views on how IIASA can contribute to the post-global agenda. Albert, the floor is yours. Thank you. You're muted.
Here we go. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for this wonderful opportunity to catch up with everybody around the important work going on at IIASA. Excellencies, partners in research, and IIASA friends, welcome to all of you that have joined us today. This, as you've just heard from a number of people, in 2022, IIASA marked its 50 years of systems analysis and excellence in research to try and avoid some of the unintended consequences of siloed decision-making and policy-making. IIASA is a multidisciplinary international institution that addresses those global problems we all share that we need to address collectively. As you will hear today, delivering on Agenda 2030 and the SDGs and improving well-being for all has become a central tenet to the research efforts at IIASA. As IIASA, we try and provide independent scientific advice, not influenced by national or other agendas, to forge a better future for humanity. And as a child of science diplomacy, as you've heard, established during the Cold War, we also continue to leverage science diplomacy by encouraging scientific cooperation as a bridge-building mechanism between communities and nations. I hope all of you will enjoy the flagship report shared today by the team, and we all look forward to hearing the contributions from the various authors. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Albert, for your remarks, which perfectly prepare the ground now for the presentation of the IIASA Flagship Report. The report will be presented to you by chapter, and I'm delighted to introduce to you Wolfgang Lutz, who is the Interim Deputy Director General for Science at IIASA and Professor of Demography at the University of Vienna. Wolfgang is also one of the co-editors of this report. Wolfgang, you will get us started now with Chapter 1, titled System Analysis for a Challenged World. And I understand you have slides, so please go ahead, Wolfgang. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. This chapter tries really to introduce the purpose of this report. And this report has a dual purpose. First, it's the ambitious attempt to summarize 5 decades of thinking about the future and modeling the future. So for the past 50 years, IIASA has always addressed the challenges of the future in the most comprehensive way possible, using the powerful analytical tools of systems analysis. The report thus provides, in a way, a history of thinking about the future and modeling the future. The year 2023 also marks the 40th anniversary of the commissioning of the Brundtland report, which has without doubt been the most influential report in spreading the notion of sustainable development, as an effort to combine the economic development concerns with the environmental change concerns. And actually, this notion of sustainable development was the title of a IIASA book even before the Brundtland report was published. In its early years in the 1970s, IIASA also was a global center of discussions and early contributions to awareness of climate change and facilitating the first debates that later led to the establishment of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So starting with its first chair, Bert Bolin, over the years, many key players in the IPCC had strong link to IIASA or even were affiliated with IIASA. Okay, the second purpose, if we go to the next slide, is about IIASA contributing to the SDG midterm review and the process of starting to think about the post-2030 agenda. Well, here it is predominantly the 5 scientific programs of IIASA that you see listed here, ranging from population and just societies over biodiversity, natural resources, energy, climate, environment, economic frontiers, to advancing a systems analysis that are all contributing in one way or the other to understanding the best pathways for implementing the 17 SDGs and the 69 more specific targets in different contexts around the world. So the following speakers will highlight selected contributions in this field. A specific new contribution of this IIASA flagship report is to also focus explicitly on well-being as the overarching, or so to say, ultimate goal of sustainable development. This can help to see the proverbial forest for the trees and effectively address the many overlaps and trade-offs that have been shown to exist among some of the individual goals and targets. So to allow this focus on well-being as the ultimate end to be also modeled in a quantitative way and assess the impact of the SDG interactions with respect to their consequences on well-being for all, IIASA has also worked on comprehensive quantitative indicators of well-being, such as the decent living standards or years of good life, which is based on human life expectancy, but only counts those years as good years where women or men are above minimum levels in both objective indicators as well as subjective life satisfaction, thus trying to bridge this gap between a community mostly interested in subjective well-being and those in objective well-being. Well, with this, I'll stop here. This will be raised again in Chapter 5, which takes the well-being indicators at the output of models. And I now pass on to Nguyen.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, for this introduction of Chapter 1. As you said, we are now moving to Chapter 2 of the flagship report, titled Population and Human Capital, which will be introduced by Nguyen, who is Director of Population and Just Society Program at IIASA. Anne, it's great to have you with us. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be here. It's a great honor for me to present what we did with some of my co-authors about population and human capital. Demography is often depicted as destiny, particularly when we are interpreting population projections and that we only look at future size or age structure. And the research that has been conducted at IIASA in the last 50 years, indeed, through the methodological advances in terms of multidimensional projections to the inclusion of education in the development of global population projections, has shown that the capacity of people, which is embodied by its human capital, is as important, if not more, than the sheer number of people. This is important to face the future challenges, whether they are related to adaptation to climate change to support for climate action, to the challenges of shrinking labor forces, aging societies, among many others. So what we see on these two graphs here that are age pyramid is one of the population in 2020. The age is on the y-axis, the male are on the left, the women are on the right-hand side of the pyramid, and the colors represent education levels from red for no education to dark blue for post-secondary education. And so if we take the children that were in India that are on the cover of chapter 2, that would be in 2020 to 2020, and we see them when they age and they are in 2050, and they could be in a society like this one, where education has progressed according to the SSP2 scenario, which is kind of a middle of the road scenario, where population is getting smaller, what you can see from the narrowing base of the pyramid, and education levels are increasing. Or, and this is my next slide, they would be in a society of stalled development with many implications in terms of high population growth, a dichotomous population split between some fragments of the population still with low levels of education and some with more levels of education. And this is according to a scenario of stalled development. These projections, these global projections, are used by many models along the IPCC, and they are able to show the implication in terms of adaptive capacity of society, and therefore very important. The way forward for us, I think, is in several directions. So first of all, population heterogeneity will be increasingly important, and I think this is coming out of the flagship report very much. And it will be important, therefore, for the demographic and economic modeling that we will do, the multidimensional approaches that we have, including multidimensional model, microsimulation, agent-based models, whatever they are, will be used, will be needed to account for this heterogeneity. As well, the local context and subnational population dynamics are becoming more and more relevant, and will need to be increasingly taken into account, particularly in the face of environmental challenges, changes like land degradation, pollution, climate change, that have significant population implication, especially at the local level. The equity and justice aspects are also becoming increasingly important, and they are critical principles for addressing global challenges. And this we will need to take into account as well more and more to tackle poverty alleviation, equitable distribution of resources, access to education, to healthcare, climate justice, and climate action. As well, what we've seen these last few years is we are facing increasing uncertainty and multiple crises, as exemplified by the COVID-19 pandemic, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which has profound effects on population dynamics, including fertility, mortality, migration, but also beyond that, such as human capital and the urbanization and other themes. So this is where the work and the setting that we have at IIASA is particularly relevant. Systems analysis becomes then crucial. So the collaboration across different research programs within IIASA are key to foster this interdisciplinary research application and address the complex global challenges effectively. And from the population side, I think we will keep contributing innovative demographic approaches to various scientific fields, and this is the way forward for us. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Anne. We will now move straight to chapter 3, called Food Security, Ecosystems and Biodiversity, which will be presented by Marta Kositka, research scholar in the Integrated Biosphere Futures Research Group of the Biodiversity and National Resources Group at program at IIASA. Marta, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and it's my pleasure to present Chapter 3. I would like to acknowledge all my colleagues who have contributed to this chapter, and I will move on to my next slide. In the pioneering stage of IIASA in the 70s, the world was concerned about the limits of the natural resource use to provide for the growing population. Among others, the research focus was on producing enough food and ensuring food security, as it was outlined in the Club of Rome report, The Limits to Growth. Furthermore, the increasing complexity of the food system and growing interdependence of various parts of the world needed new tools and approaches. IIASA has contributed with such tools and methods. Among others, the first global multi-region and multi-commodity general equilibrium model of the world food system was developed. It has been widely used to answer questions related to the role of trade and climate change impacts on food security. The model, together with developed jointly by IIASA and FAO, spatially detailed inventory of land resources, referred to as agroecological zoning, constituted an advanced integrated ecological economic framework, which later was used by the IPCC. IIASA has also pioneered with ecosystem resilience research that is still at the center of concern in the forestry research. Finally, the first of its kind model that represented the big picture of the forest sector was developed. It has been used in several groundbreaking studies, such as the assessment of the impact of a possible global afforestation program. IIASA continues to be impactful at present. Looking at the state of food security, the fears of the crisis were avoided. Nonetheless, many problems have been postponed and new ones have emerged. Mainly thanks to the technological progress and trade expansion, hunger and malnutrition have declined. However, prevalence of undernourishment remains very high, while simultaneously the world is facing an epidemic of obesity. Our diets are also one of the main contributions to the destruction of the natural environment, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Together with the new challenges and increasing complexity of the world, the research at IIASA has provided new tools and methods. The state-of-the-art models include a global economic land use model covering the sectors of agriculture, forestry, and biofuels, a wildfire climate impacts and adaptation model, hydrological and hydroeconomic models, and a biodiversity impacts model. They were used to inform decision makers with regional and global studies, such as the European Green Deal, Global Biodiversity Outlook, or the US Renewable Fuel Standards Rule. And please, next slide. Looking into the future, we need tools that will be able to capture trade-offs and synergies between all development objectives, distributional impacts, and shocks. This new generation of tools and approaches needs to support decision makers with the recent challenges, such as increasingly frequent extreme weather events, environmental degradation, Russian invasion of Ukraine, ramifications of COVID-19 pandemic, and highly unequal distribution of impacts of these shocks. So these tools need to be able to capture the local details thanks to high spatial resolution. In order to deliver across all sustainability dimensions, a fully integrated ecological, economic, and social systems modeling approach is needed. Finally, global collaboration and involvement of the broad community is necessary to ensure relevance and applicability. IBIOM, the Innovative Integrated Biosphere Management Modeling Initiative, addresses all these needs. With its modular framework, it brings together established models and also models under development to form possibly the largest fully integrated ecosystems modeling suite in the world. It will be hosted on an open cloud-based computational infrastructure, allowing researchers globally to use the models and also to participate in developing the platform. With all these innovative and integrative modeling initiatives, IIASA aims to further strengthen its role in comprehensive systems analysis, the food security, land, vegetation, livestock, water biodiversity nexus, including the social, economic, the governance challenges that will become even more relevant over the coming decades. And this is it. Thank you. And back to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Marta, for introducing Chapter 3. Our next speaker is Nebojša Nakisenović, who is going to introduce Chapter 4, called Energy, Technology, and Climate Change. Naki is a distinguished emeritus research scholar in the Transformative Institutional and Social Solution Research Group within the Energy, Climate and Environment program at IIASA. Naki, we are honored to have you with us. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Barbara. Great pleasure to speak about 50 years of research on energy technology and climate change. But first, I would like to recognize 31 authors and contributors of this chapter. Next slide, please. In this slide, I would like to show the research of the first decade at IIASA that started exactly in 1973 in the middle of the energy crisis. It was a comprehensive assessment of global energy from resources all the way to energy services. And what was really unique, that it was really global, including Soviet Union and China. The other unique feature was a modeling approach was used also to develop scenarios reaching 50 to 80 years in the future. And that was all documented in the 2-volume book, Energy in a Finite World. What you can see here in the dashed line is the low scenario projection of carbon dioxide concentrations. We projected them at 420 parts per million, and that's exactly where we are today. The red arrow shows that. But the big difference is that in our scenario, they're leveling off. In reality, they're increasing very, very quickly. And the reason is that the emissions shown in the black curve with the other red arrow, we have assumed would have peaked at the turn of the century and will approach net zero by the middle of the century. That all did not happen. And but according to the IPCC and many other studies, that's what we really need to do to have a chance of achieving 1.5 degree stabilization. Next slide, please. Building on this platform of the first century, the research evolved through many changes. And here's an exemplary set of publications that illustrate some of the achievements. On the top left, in 1978, the first report on climate, then the scope report with IIASA authors in 1986 that provided the scientific basis for establishing IPCC in 1988. And IIASA scientists contributed to the IPCC from the first to the last 6 assessment report. Significantly, I would like to highlight the emission scenario work shown at the top right in the green book, where IIASA led the development of the first set of scenarios, and IIASA was also one of the leading organizations in developing the current set, the SSPs. And on the bottom right, you see the SIST assessment report and the report on 1.5 degrees. Now, in the energy, I would like to highlight the blue book, Global Energy Perspectives, top right. That was the first study really to develop sustainable development scenarios and was vetted by the regional groups of the World Energy Council. The red book toward the bottom, the Global Energy Assessment, which is close to a Bible size, was a comprehensive scientific basis that also helped identify the targets of the SDG 7 on energy. And the world in 2050, I will say a few words about that later. In technology, IIASA also made a significant contributions. Let me just illustrate the 2002 publication in the lower left corner, also co-authored by our colleague Bill Nordhaus, who later received the Nobel Prize. Next slide, please. And IIASA research in this area has been always policy-oriented. I would like to illustrate that here. On the vertical scale, you see the global economic output, which is today about $100 trillion. And to secure energy security for the world would cost about $200 billion per year. And this is clearly highest priority today. To curb the air pollution, about $600 billion a year. And IIASA, I should mention, also has leading models in the regional air pollution. In particular, they were used for European transboundary air pollution legislation. Now, the third column is climate, about $1 trillion per year. And the point is that the synergies would be huge among these objectives. So the fourth column shows that if we were able to do them jointly, then the cost would be significantly lower, about 40% lower. Next slide, please. And this has been also the central focus of the World in 2050 to provide science, technology, and innovation basis or underpinning for the 2030 agenda. And you've heard that we are very far behind. The World in 2050 has identified 6 transformations that if we were achieved in unison, we would be on the best way of achieving all of the 17 SDGs and 169 targets. On the bottom, you see decarbonization and energy. On the top left, digital revolution. Next slide. I would like to conclude just to show you how that's reflected in the current research of IIASA. In the outer ring, you see 10 problem areas that IIASA is working on. On the right, achieving net zero, climate, emissions, managing air pollution. On top, just, inclusive, and equitable services. And this is also an inclusive, integrated agenda, trying to show multiple benefits and synergies through modeling and the databases. Thank you very much. Back to you, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Naki, for this first glimpse of Chapter 4 of the flagship report. We are now proceeding with Michael Kuhn, who is the director of the Economics Frontier program in IIASA. Michael, you will present Chapter 5 of the flagship report titled Global Systems Analysis for Understanding the Drivers of Sustainable Wellbeing. Michael, we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Welcome, everyone. Yes, this chapter is special in that there's actually only few authors, but this is particular to acknowledge my great team of co-authors without whom this wouldn't be there. Second, it's special in that it actually is what could be considered a really genuinely new piece of analysis, which we did especially for this report. So thank you to the editors for this great opportunity. It's about well-being in a global systems model, and maybe I should say that global systems modeling has been has had a home at IIASA ever since its conception. That is, ever since Donella Meadows was actually a part to IIASA while developing a lot of the limits to growth analysis. Global systems models are done really to understand the how different Earth systems, environmental, economic, social, demographic, interact in shaping global processes and outcomes, and typically in a rather complex way. These models are used to do scenario analysis. We've already heard from Anne about the SSPs. But they're also used to actually study policy scenarios, which both of which we have been looking at in the context of this chapter. Now, one surprising thing is that while global systems analysis has to some extent always had a focus on human well-being, in many of these models, this focus is just implicit. So they never actually talk about human well-being as outcome. Some models are generating the Human Development Index as an outcome, but they don't go to the level that Wolfgang was mentioning it, namely to a population and what is how do these global scenarios translate into population level well-being? So this is precisely the objective we've set ourselves for this chapter, to integrate a well-grounded well-being measure into a global systems model, and first of all, to simply check on the SSP scenarios, how they trace into well-being, but also then to study the role of female empowerment. And I'm almost a bit embarrassed not to have put this up, but in the context of this particular setting, talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, this is, of course, about Sustainable Development Goal 5, gender equality. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? We essentially take two well-established IIASA approaches, the Felix Global Systems Model, which has been around and prominently used for quite some time, and the Years of Good Life Wellbeing Indicator, as developed by Wolfgang and his group. And we marry them to find out, well, what is the well-being outcome of some of these scenarios once we take them through the systems model. The Felix model, you see it mapped out there. Obviously, I can't go into any detail, is a complex animal, including an economic system, the population, the education system, but then also a variety of environmental system, the climate system, you name it. The Jogel, and Wolfgang was hinting at that, is crucially based on life expectancy. So if you're not alive, there's no well-being anyway. But then you're actually only counting good years if you're out of poverty, if you're meeting criteria of basic cognition and basic health. And Wolfgang was mentioning the life satisfaction. This is not, for technical reasons, we haven't included that yet, but that's on the agenda. Next slide, please. So here are some of the results from our studies. We look at 3 scenarios: an optimistic one, which is the green one, the business as usual, which is the blue one, and a pessimistic, which is the red one. And the sort of very baseline scenarios are the dashed lines. What we do see is that in terms of conventional indicators, GDP, life expectancy, also an educational indicator, you kind of see what you expect, namely that things are going well in terms of the optimistic scenario and they're not going very well. Look at life expectancy in terms of the pessimistic scenarios. Now, we're tracing this in the Human Development Index as a kind of control, but we importantly also trace it in the Years of Good Life indicator, plotted here for women at age 20 and men at age 20. And let me stress that we could do this for many other demographic subgroups. Things would look very similar, but that's one of the nice things about having the Yogel in this. Now, we see that, as expected, well-being is highest in the optimistic scenario. It's actually not just stagnating, but even declining in the pessimistic scenario. Female empowerment, finally, we conceptualize this as an increase in female enrollment and graduation rates in education, as well as much higher labor force participation of women. Of course, there's many other dimensions, but we're focusing on these 2 economic ones, if you wish. And what we see is that it's really doing a great job by shifting the graphs, the pathways from the dashed ones to the solid ones. So notably, in all of the scenarios, be they optimistic or pessimistic, there's a sizable gain in well-being. Notably, mostly for women, but men are at least not doing worse. I mean, there could be done more about tracing out co-benefits, which we haven't discussed in any great detail, but we see there's a sizable and large well-being impact, and notably it's in all scenarios. So this is female empowerment is a very robust policy, and we also see that the shift in GDP is not very large, neither is it in life expectancy. So there's a lot of leveraging. I leave this to future research. We've just started a research agenda on this, and very much look forward to pursuing this with colleagues at IIASA. I thank you for your attention. Thanks. And back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Michael. Great. Okay, before we now move to the presenter of the last chapter, I just would like to remind the audience to use the Q&A function on your screen. This is the opportunity later on then to address some of the questions that you might have. And now, last but certainly not least, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Shonali Pachauri. Shonali is Research Group Leader of the Transformative Institutional and Social Solutions Research Group in the Energy, Climate and Environment Program at IIASA. And she is, together with Wolfgang Lutz, the second co-editor of the flagship report. We very much look forward to your presentation, Shonali, which will capture the forward-looking messages of the report. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I'm delighted to really present some of the content of the last and concluding chapter of the report that presents these 3 key messages for policy that we believe are really critical to accelerate the SDG implementation in the second half of the 2030 agenda period, and we hope will trigger some discussions about a post-2030 agenda. So as a backdrop, as this slide presents, we have kind of looked in the introduction of this chapter at how IIASA's science diplomacy role has changed over the last 50 years, and primarily how it's providing independent and policy relevant research and analysis on challenges of a global or universal nature, and its use of these scientific findings to inform major international decision-making processes has been critical. It then briefly discusses how the thinking, the discourse on development has shifted over the last half century from an almost exclusive focus on economic growth to increasing calls for moving beyond GDP and perpetual economic growth as the goal for society. This, of course, stems from better understanding of the links between economic growth and ecological and environmental damages, and the fact that we see ever more consumption does not necessarily bring ever rising well-being. The shift in development priorities and the rise in environmental concerns is also reflected in the central purpose of the 2030 Agenda. And basically, it's aimed to leave no one behind. Fundamentally, of course, the SDGs have the ambition to tackle multidimensional and interacting inequalities by enhancing people's capabilities and ensuring that everyone has equal access to opportunity and choice, while at the same time protecting the environment and planet. While long on ambition, at this midway mark of the 2030 Agenda, we see that progress has been extremely unsatisfactory, as previous speakers have also alluded, and the goals are in grave jeopardy. So as a conclusion of the report, therefore, we offer these three key messages for policy that we think are critical to overcome obstacles and accelerate transformation towards sustainable well-being for all. So in our first key message, we call to mainstream a systems analysis approach in policy making at all levels. We see that taking a compartmentalized or siloed approach to sustainable development will not achieve the overall goal of sustainable well-being. And to do this, we really require a systems approach. We substantiate this by highlighting several examples of IIASA research that has provided evidence of how policy decisions, when made taking either a narrow focus on a single sector or issue, or considering an inappropriate spatial scale or temporal horizon, turn out to be suboptimal. For this reason, we are calling for coordinated, integrated, and systems analysis approaches to policy making at all levels. Our second key message is a call to enhance individual agency. While the agency of all marginalized groups and people matters, we emphasize in particular empowering women, in particular through providing equal access to quality primary and secondary education for all. This is important because progress in female education still lags that of males in many countries, and there is a large gender gap in education. While the education of girls is not sufficient for empowerment, it is without question necessary. This is supported by a vast literature and also IIASA research of case countries like Finland and Mauritius, as well as the systems dynamics global model that was just presented as part of Chapter 5. Most recently, there's been an editorial in the journal Nature published just last week that also discusses evidence that lends support to how gender equality leads to better outcomes across all the SDGs. Our third and final message is a call to strengthen collective action and governance. In addition to an individual agency, people's collective ability to exercise joint action and work for global solidarity must be strengthened, and this requires effective global governance with acknowledged legitimacy. This planet is our only home. It is our common habitat, and therefore global cooperation and representation is important to manage the global commons. While the need to reform global governance is agreed by many, the form of a new regime might take, whatever that might be, is still debated. We present two distinct views on this. One view leans on the courageous leadership of select coalitions and new alliances to innovate and test new and bolder solutions for transformations. A second view considers whether a new global parliament might help improve global governance. Both views recognize the need to bridge the knowledge-action gap through transformed science policy and science-society interactions. While all three critical policy messages presented are distinct and each of them is important, together they form a broader call for structural change. Such change calls for recognizing existing inequities and existing and past injustices, and for re-evaluating our current systems of people-nature relationships, broader societal organization, and the global order, with the ultimate goal of achieving sustainable well-being for all. Thank you very much, and I hand back to you now, Barbara.
Thank you so much, Shonali. This concludes now the presentation of the 6 chapters of the flagship report. And I would like to thank our dear colleagues for these insightful presentations. You've certainly given a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure the audience will be eager to learn more about the flagship report, which, by the way, will become available right after this launch event. With this first introduction of the IIASA Flagship Report, it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Giovanni Janet Madise, who is Director of Research for Sustainable Development Policies and Head of the Malawi Office of the African Institute for Development Policy. Dr. Madise, it's really wonderful that you are with us today. Thank you so much for your time. We would be very interested to hear your view of some of the takeaways from the flagship report that you have just heard. So please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And I want to first start by congratulating IIASA on their report, which helps us to understand the interconnectedness between people and the natural systems that are important for our well-being. The evolution of the IIASA's research over 50 years demonstrates the Institute's innovativeness and also a passion for human well-being. I saw that demonstrated in the chapters on population and human capital, mitigation of climate change, adaptations to its effects. I also saw that in the reflections that the report gave on issues such as we can no longer just look at simple dichotomies, global north, global south, spatial heterogeneity, but we also need to understand a lot of other heterogeneities, for example, social heterogeneity. I really also appreciated understanding and reading more about issues such as food security and how we address hunger, emphasizing the fact that producing more is not always the solution, but we can be better at distributing, we can be better at reducing overconsumption and reducing waste. I liked the final conclusions of the statement of the report, which resonate well with the Global Sustainable Development Report that I co-authored with 14 other scientists and which was launched yesterday by the UN. The fact that we need systems analysis approach into policy making, and the Global Sustainable Development Report highlights that we need a systems transformation. We need to prioritize women's empowerment through universal female education. And the report highlights the need for improving human capital and also the strengthened collective action and governance. These are issues that the report that we launched yesterday also highlights. And I applaud IIASA for a report that really resonates with the GSDR and also with the future of post-2030. I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Madise, for these wonderful remarks and for this first reaction to the report. Now, let me turn to our second feedback speaker, Adil Najam. Adil is the newly appointed president of the World Wildlife Fund. Congratulations, Adil, for your appointment. And he is also Dean Emeritus at the Frederick S. Pardee School of Global Studies at Boston University. Adil, you're certainly no stranger to IIASA with the many involvements that you have, having participated in the IIASA Young Scientist Summer Program. You have served on the IIASA Council. You've been recognized as a IIASA Honorary Scholar, and you are also the president of Friends of IIASA. We very much look forward to your reaction to the flagship report and any key takeaways that you would like to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. Thank you very much to you. Thank you to IIASA for including me in this, for giving me the opportunity to not just speak, but more importantly, to listen to what has just been said. And thank you to everyone who's worked on this report. In a world that where the ratio of report to action is severely problematic, I think the 100 pages or so of this report packs more ideas than you could imagine could be packed in 100 pages. So I would really urge people to actually read this, because it is an extremely impressive and sometimes rather disturbing analysis of where we stand on this planet today. And for doing this, I thank you. Thank you also for your kind introduction on all the things, my university hat, my WWF hat. But most importantly, being a friend of IIASA and the current president of the organization, Friends of IIASA. And I wanted to start with that as one of my only 2 points. One of the things that I do think should also be highlighted as an achievement of these 50 years is the cultivation of the friends of IIASA, not the organization, but all across the world. How do I get this? No, the other way. The picture, the picture of the globe that you see next to me. Those dots are not just reports. Those dots are not just research findings. Those dots are not just a representation of system analysis as connects ideas, but it is also a reflection, I think, of how systems analysis ought to be connecting people. And I think that is not an insignificant contribution of this organization, particularly if you look at what has been happening in the world in those 50 years, particularly if you think about what Shonali just talked about, and especially the third of your findings, the need for collective action in a time, and this is really my point, the need for collective action in a time when the world seems not to be ready or able to do collective action. In fact, one of the many tragic changes of the world and where we stand on is that it seems to me that the appetite for collective action is probably lower today than at any time in my professional memory. And some of it is maybe good. Maybe this is the Twitter effect of individual action. Maybe this is our ability that technology gives us of being alone for hours and yet thinking we are with others. And that can have its power too. But it is also the lack of faith that we see around the world in institutions and organizations, and therefore in the mechanisms of global governance. And that leads to my second point. One is that the cultivation of friends is important, that cultivation of connections of people. You cannot go anywhere in the world today and talk seriously about system analysis without a link to IIASA not becoming clear. A, we should be very proud of that. B, we should be carrying that torch in the future because that is more important today than at any other point. And the second point that I was mentioning that this leads to is the need to be bold about sustainable analysis, systems analysis and sustainable development itself. It is fine to have resolutions that we will have policy that will have systems analysis. In some ways, the 50 years has been internalized. Everyone talks about it. But I do think that because of what I just said, because of the time we are in, there is a need for boldness in systems analysis itself because the challenges are so great. I don't want to take too long, but as I end, if I look at the chapters and if I look at this wonderful analysis, one of the things that comes up is that we aren't where we want it to be. You know, the wonderful, brilliant graphs that Naki pointed out, his first of his graphs, we got it exactly right on where the emissions will be. Our ability to act about it was exactly wrong. And that is an indictment on whether we as a world can in fact use knowledge to drive policy. And now this report tells us that the stakes are so high that if we don't, we are really talking about very, very serious consequences. And because of that, there is a need, I think, for a boldness in how we think about system analysis itself. To me, the importance of this report, Barbara, is not just what it tells us about 50 years of this amazing institution. I think it is what it tells us about what we have to do in the next 50, in the next 10, in the next 5, in the next 1. Not only at IIASA, but all over. Again, I take the message from Naki, but from the whole report, from what Wolfgang said, that tinkering, we cannot get out of these problems by tinkering alone. Tinkering is not a solution. And that's my point of boldness. Very, very last point, and then I do promise to shut up. Each of the issues that have been raised, as I read the report and hear you, each of the issues that has been raised, the report tells us is solvable. In fact, it tells us how they can be solved. So each of those issues we can do. We have the resources, we have the science, we have the knowledge, we have the ability. Except there is one issue, the third of the last 3 findings, conclusions of this report, that I think is more important than all others. And that is our ability for collective action in global governance. I have no doubt in my mind, no doubt, none whatsoever, that we have the knowledge, we have the resources to solve these problems. I think it's a race between human knowledge
and human wisdom. I have no doubt that we have the knowledge. I sometimes wonder whether we have the wisdom. I wish you all the best, and I wish our planet some more wisdom. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Adil. These are wonderful words to conclude this great session. And I think you also made a very good point there, how this report is different, sets itself apart from so many of the other reports that are out there, and how critical it is to mainstream system analysis into policymaking at all levels. So we are coming now to the end of this wonderful session with very inspirational messages and important takeaways. And it is up to me now to sincerely thank all of the speakers as well as the audience that you have been with us today. Right after this event, you will receive the flagship report via email. So you will be the very first ones to get a copy of this IIASA publication. Together with a link to the recorded session, the report will also be available on the IIASA website. We had a very active audience today with many questions, but unfortunately, time permitting, we did not get a chance to get to those questions, but we will share the answers with you by email, so that will certainly be addressed. This leaves me to once again thank everyone for your participation and your interest. Stay well. Best wishes from all of us at IIASA. Thank you and goodbye.